and we'll welcome Alex Hilton, who also serves us as our Agile New England treasurer. And he's also going to be speaking with us tonight. So,
All right, and thank you, Maggie. So I'm just going to quickly share my screen here. We're going to have an interactive conversation today, no breakout rooms or anything like that, but do just want to make sure that everyone does have access in the chat. I just put access to the Mentimeter we'll be using for today. And we have just a quick question on to what extent do folks agree that agile coaches or scrum masters should prioritize the following areas? So if folks can get in there, just a quick little icebreaker, just want to see what the temperature of the room is
so
for
we just go to
today.
menti.com, right? And we put that
Yep,
code in, that 8-digit code.
yep. Follow the instructions at the top of the screen. Uh, the the chat has the URL and the code to copy and paste if you need. I want to see if we can get some folks in there and see what people think. What's the role of an agile coach and a scrum master? Seeing two people in there now. Maybe we can at least get half the group. There we
Oh,
go.
so we vote on all of them, huh?
Yep.
We rate them all.
Got mine in, Alex.
See one. That's good.
Show off. Um,
I have a vested party in this conversation.
Few folks in there. Assume folks are taking their time. That's all right. We don't want to spend too much time here though, so please lock in your answers. Only a couple minutes per one.
This is a great
So another
graph. I
one.
really like this animation.
That's nice. Got three. See if we can get a few more.
yeah. So if anybody, just to recap, just go to menti.com and you can type that in, or you can copy and paste it from the text. And then just slide over the scale of how important for each of the 5 and hit submit.
See the numbers shifting. It's interesting that it's normalizing. I've done this once before, and this group's a little different than my last group. This is much more even. Let's see if we can get a couple more. There we go. All right. So thank you everyone for voting. So the point of this question is to try to get a quick gauge as to where the audience is. I do appreciate that everyone does see value in all these categories. What we're going to be talking about today is more along the line of these bottom 3 here. So fostering business value, supporting technical excellence and delivery enablement, and leading organizational change and transformation. One thing we've noticed within the past few years in particular, the sort of focus on frameworks and processes and team collaboration has kind of taken a lot of the attention of the Scrum Master role and Agile Coach role as well. And we've seen a lot of organizations respond to that. So, sort of infamously, Capital One eliminating all their Agile roles and rolling them into technical roles. That's kind of one of those things that has resulted from this focus, where essentially people got a little too caught up in these two areas and may have forgotten some of the things that really matter to an organization. That's what we're going to be talking about today, is what really matters to an organization and how do we bridge the gap between that value delivery and the technical, and how's the Agile coach fit into that. So with that, we're going to be talking about how we build the holistic Agile practice in bridging these technical and value creation skills. Just a quick bit about me. I'm Alex Hilton. I'm the treasurer here at Agile New England, but I actually started in small business coaching and consulting. So, organizations up to around the $100 million mark, so relatively small in comparison. But main thing you get to learn within small businesses, how to think about the whole system. When you're dealing with a mom and pop shop, you're not necessarily thinking about any of these different domains as separate. It's all integral to how you actually drive a business. That led me into theory of constraints, which really builds off of this concept, but it came out of a manufacturing setting. And that got me a little bit more interested in, how do we actually make organizations more impactful, which ended up driving me towards lean and eventually agile, where I eventually became a scrum master. And what I initially noticed was that a lot of these ceremonies, a lot of the frameworks, didn't necessarily drive value in themselves. It was the practices within them and what we were doing with them, but enforcing the framework itself wasn't necessarily the driving value. And what I saw pretty early on was if I integrated in some new concepts as well as some old ones from DevOps and extreme programming, it led to significant alignment between technical teams and business teams. And then that very quickly found some very fast wins. So found things like quadrupling release frequencies, found out how to connect that with our sales and how we actually ended up driving revenue, and how we could actually enhance our organizations, which very quickly got me promoted into release train engineer. So seeing teams of teams. And then eventually I became an agile coach and trainer, where I'm still focused on how do we actually bridge this technical and business gap for real impact. My core message for today for folks is really about that idea is for an organization's long-term success, we really have to identify where its core constraints are. And its core constraints to delivering real value is what we're looking at. Anything else is just an illusion of progress. If we don't really drive improvements that are fundamental to the organization, we may as well not do anything. In fact, it might be better to do nothing. As agile coaches, and that includes scrum masters, our role is to help teams uncover these constraints and foster adaptability and enable the continuous flow of value. To do that, though, we must go beyond just the fundamentals, just beyond those ceremonies, just beyond the frameworks, and really get an understanding of the unique technical and business landscape within our organizations. What is it that we're actually building? What's the software? What's the tools? What's the technology underlying it? How does that actually drive our business value? And how can we find ways to keep enhancing it and make money more effectively for our organizations? Because true evolution comes from solving the right problems at the right time, and we have to know what questions to ask for that. Now, just going back towards my small business consulting for a time, I worked with one of the largest baseball bat distributors in the United States. They needed to increase the quality of their shipping for cost optimization. So they had about a 99.6%, I think it was, success rate within their shipping. So a little bit of an error. And they wanted to really get that up to 5 nines of accuracy. Now, initially, they were going to spend a huge amount of money on it, about a $500,000 investment to do a whole system transformation. But when we started looking at their system, we mapped out their system, took a good look at it, and we noticed that there was something fundamental missing from the very first step that the bat started going through the distribution process. It was the real bottleneck. It was a quality constraint that was missing at the very first step. And that's where a lot of the errors were coming from. And adding literally just a barcode scanner at that first step, about a $500 change, ended up actually getting them 4 nines of accuracy. So immediate results for very, very low cost. And that's because they knew exactly where in their system to look. It took a moment. Someone had to step back, look at the entire assembly line, distribution line, and see where the issues were, what was happening, and then had to ask the question of, hey, what's going on here, and what's actually causing these issues? Now, 4 nines is great. Didn't get them all the way there, but it got them most of the way there. So they later found ways to automate other processes for just around I think that's about an eighth of $1 million. And that actually got them to that 5 nines of accuracy. So again, for about a quarter of the cost that they were initially planning for, just over a quarter of the cost if you factor in that $500, they ended up getting right to the level they needed because they knew how to inspect their system and ask questions around the technical and value elements. And that's a real theory of constraints approach where we're really thinking about what's constraining how we're delivering value to our customers and what can we do different? What small tweaks can we do within our system to invest incrementally to solve these problems? That's really what our goal is as coaches. That's what our goal is as a Scrum Master. So key takeaways that actually taught me. Well, first things first, systems thinking wins. Asking what constraints exist in our systems that slow us down helps us understand where can we make these small efforts that are really going to have exponential returns of investment. and significant downstream impact to improve the overall ability for the organization to deliver. What's our cost efficiency? Again, what are those small changes? Again, you can spend a tremendous amount of money building in CI/CD pipelines, doing DevOps practices, using new technologies out there like LaunchDarkly or maybe AI these days. But a lot of that could be very expensive and may not get the value you want if you're solving for the wrong problem. So how do we avoid spending this huge amount of money when we could do something that's maybe a little smaller that can get us most of the way there? And then finally, the scalability of this. Again, these big upfront transformations and changes, let's think about how we might be able to continuously remediate these constraints within our organization as we identify them. And how do we actually do an incremental investment to make sure that we're continuously driving long-term value? Those were the things that actually taught me early on before I even really got into this agile thing. And I keep mentioning this term, theory constraints. Now, might be a new term for some folks here, but I'm hoping that it's a pretty simple concept. Now, the idea is that if we think about a pipe and we want to increase the outflow of a pipe, where would we change the system first? I'm going to turn on the Mentimeter and see where people think we might change this system. So if we want to increase the outflow of the pipe, where do we change the system? So hopefully everyone has Mentimeter open. Do we change it at point A? Do we change it at point B? Do we change it at C? Where in the system might we change it? Seeing a couple of responses. We have a few more out there. 3. All right. Let's see if we can get another one. So quick question. Why do we think C? I'm seeing a unanimous answer. Why do we change C? Semi-unanimous. Why do we think C?
Because that's where that's where all my hair gets clogged up in that and that's
Yeah.
Bottleneck?
So, yeah, the bottleneck, exactly. So if we focus anywhere else in the system, we could increase B, let's say. It's not going to really increase the amount of water flowing through this pipe. But if we increase C, where our bottleneck is, it enables a better outflow. Anywhere else we change this system, we're not really going to see that much of a difference. Now, once we do change C, maybe we make C as wide as D, let's say, well, then B becomes the bottleneck. The system changes. So we might have to go back, take a look, and see how we remove that bottleneck. But again, if we're changing the entire system at once, we're just spending a lot of money on new piping when really we probably could have made a small change to our constraint. That's really theory constraints in a nutshell. Focus on your biggest constraint to the flow of value. Now I'm using a dangerous word here, value. Well, what's value actually mean? What are we actually increasing? Let's make this simple. For businesses, the goal of a business from theory constraints perspective is maximize the effectiveness of a business to generate money. This is measured in 3 ways. 1, increase net profit, so profitability. 2, boost ROI. So again, what's your return on investment when you're making spending new money? And finally, strengthen cash flow liquidity. So again, cash flow, you don't want your business to go illiquid. That means that you're probably going to be bankrupt, which means no more business. So again, these are the 3 areas. So the idea is let's increase our profitability while simultaneously increasing our return on investment, while simultaneously strengthening our liquidity. 3 areas that we want to focus on. And this is going to be achieved by increasing throughput. So the amount of stuff, the amount of value we're delivering to the customer that they're purchasing and consuming, ensuring good quality, minimizing defects, because again, if we have stuff going back up the pipe, or let's say we don't have water flowing through that water pipe, maybe we have some sewage or rust or other materials, you're probably going to have a frustrated customer who's eventually going to leave. Think about if anyone's thought about a recent Boeing plane and their goal of maximizing shareholder value as a core goal for the organization. Well, if you slip quality, people are going to say something like never fly a Boeing. We want to keep our defects to a minimum. And then finally, our goal there is to start accelerating our lead times. So reducing delays end to end so we can deliver more effectively, more value more quickly. And in order to do this, we have to think about the entirety of our system. This doesn't just mean my team and what they're delivering, or, I'm in dev, I'm a developer, I don't care what QA is dealing with, I don't care about what operations is dealing with. We have to think end to end from when our initial customer makes a request or a need to when we deliver it. And potentially that can go even further beyond our customer. If we're in, say, a B2B market, for instance, we might have to think maybe our customer's customer. If I'm building gearboxes for Toyota and they're selling Toyota cars, my sale doesn't just end at Toyota getting that gearbox. It might end at where the customer gets that Toyota and making sure that the customer has a good experience with that gearbox as well. So we have to think of the whole of our systems. That's the basics of TOC in a nutshell. Now, theory of constraints has echoed throughout Agile and DevOps. There's a shared foundation here. So theory constraints really focuses on eliminating these constraints. It really came from manufacturing, so it's kind of easy to think about your pipelines, but you can see the same concepts echo into agile practices. We think about incremental delivery and incremental value delivery. How do we get quick feedback? How do we build a product that we can test, validate, and make sure that it's solving our customer needs, that's built up to the definitions of done we're looking for. And that went even further when DevOps came out a few years after Agile was founded, and talking about accelerating this even further and talking about continuous integration and continuous delivery. How do we actually release quality product out the door on an ongoing, quick basis? All three, the quality is non-negotiable. Again, you might hear the term built-in quality. The idea here is that we don't want to have bottlenecks, and quality prevents waste from accruing, which means that we are going to have an easier flow and things not going back up the pipe and congesting it. Within Agile, again, we're going to do things like iterative testing. And DevOps, again, will take that a step further. Let's automate the testing. Let's do things like test-driven development, or make sure that we have high levels of unit test coverage or other types of coverage like security scans and secret scans and those sorts of things to make sure that we're always testing to make sure our system is of high quality so we can get that value out the door often, perhaps even multiple times per day. And then finally, all three think about end-to-end optimization. So theory constraints, let's map value streams and think about the constraints in our system. When a request comes in, let's deliver it, and where's our bottleneck? Agile has solved for some of this. It says, let's think about making cross-functional teams that interact well with each other, that have shared ownership and can work to solve their own problems. And DevOps, again, will scale this further. Like, let's eliminate this barrier between Dev and Ops entirely and have the developers thinking about what it takes to actually operate the system. So how do we actually make an optimum system? So these concepts underpin each other, and they help us understand what to do as Agile leaders. So the modern Agile reality. These days, we need to go beyond just the frameworks and systems. Pretty much anyone can do the framework or use Jira, the stuff that Capital One was saying. But it takes someone who actually can sit down and get an understanding of what our system is and how it operates to actually be able to coach it and improve it. That's where our Scrum Masters and Agile coaches come in. We have to understand the bottlenecks in our system. Where is the biggest impediment to our flow of value? Maybe it's deployment failures or test flakiness, whatever it may be. How do we actually identify these core constraints within our system? We have to know what questions to ask. We have to be able to sit down with our team and understand it. So when we do start to talk to our teams, we want to ask them, like, how might we actually solve for some of these challenges? What might we bring in as practices? We need to have that technical fluency so we know when to say, hey, when do we want to automate pipelines or manage infrastructure as code or use observability tools? We need to understand these questions. So we at least need to have at least a basic sense of technical fluency.
So is it like can I ask a question?
Yes.
Is it like recommended that we meet with the head, like biz ops and DevOps, and who are we as agile leaders meeting with, and we're having these discussions?
So I haven't gotten into that part yet, but right now,
Oh, you're
for
getting
us, yeah, so for our perspective, it's whatever it takes for us to understand our system. Let's meet with who we need to meet with to understand the system. What does value mean within our system? What's the technical requirements? This might mean sitting down with the teams and the tech leads, getting in their minds and just understanding a little bit about what they're doing. We'll talk a little bit about that at the end, but
Okay.
really it is thinking about all the people in the system and what they do. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to be able to be someone who goes out there and codes tomorrow. You don't necessarily have to be a developer, you don't have to be a tester or anything like that, but meet with your teams and get in their mind and understand what they do. Now, going back a little bit, so I mentioned extreme programming. So extreme programming, you'll often see this mixed in with a lot of Scrum practices. If anyone's familiar with user stories came out of extreme programming. So Agile coaches should also be advocating for a lot of the technical practices that came with that. So just as a lot of these concepts got married into Scrum or whatever framework you're using, if you're using Scaled framework, Scaled Agile, for instance, think about what technical practices also helped accelerate organizations. Things like refactoring tech debt. How do we actually build that into our practices? Why would we do something like test-driven development or pair programming or continuous integration? We've had Woody Zuhl here at Agile New England before talking about mob programming, now called software teaming. What's that method do when you bring all the developers in a single room and they're starting to talk through a single problem? How does this impact the team's ability to understand the system and solve for problems? We have to understand the impact these practices can have positively or negatively within our teams. So, quick question for the audience coming back to the Mentimeter. If you had to choose one word to describe your technical comfort as an Agile leader, what might it be? There's one word that might describe this audience's comfort as Agile leaders. Let's see, anyone yet? Do folks find that they have strength in it? I'm seeing a lot of Agile leaders say that they're AI folks these days. Maybe you actually came from a development background. Maybe you came from project management and ended up in this area. What was one word? High, snazzy, cozy. It's a couple words. Intermedium. Fearless. That's an interesting one. Thorough. Strong. So some level of comfort it sounds. That's good. Talk a little bit about the other areas to focus on as well. So hopefully this talk doesn't leave you behind if you are very comfortable, but we are focused on the technical domain right now. High, medium, yep. Yeah, so main thing is and then having a little bit of technical comfort is important within these roles. The stronger it is, the better, but at the same time, there's other areas to focus on, and we're gonna look at that in a moment. Now, first thing, how do we actually connect these technical practices, DevOps, extreme programming practices, all that stuff? How do we connect it to value? How do we actually know if our team is high performing? Well, the DevOps Research Assessment, DORA, is a research program that identifies key DevOps metrics to help measure software delivery performance. Something interesting about it is it came from the idea that we were talking about before on theory of constraints, where it is thinking about how do we actually deliver value very quickly to our customers. And what's that actually mean from a DevOps perspective? Gene Kim, one of the founders of Dora, actually very blatantly and very and actually stated that he basically stole from Eli Goldratt in his writing of the Phoenix Project on how he mirrored the goal from Eli Goldratt and the theory of constraints, which came out of it. What makes Dora interesting is it gives us a very quick way of bridging the technical and the value delivery setup. Because the first thing it does is it helps us identify improvements to delivery performance. What's it actually mean for a team to be wildly successful? Gives us some quick benchmarks for high performing teams. Certainly there's some nuance. If you're on like mobile app teams, for instance, sometimes it might be a little different than say a team building a traditional web app. But again, it gives us at least an understanding of what to focus on. It's based on the same concepts, on throughput, on quality, things that should be very familiar. This helps us start to identify those core bottlenecks in our DevOps pipelines. When we're delivering the value, where are these constraints, and what must we do to actually press the lever on our technical side to actually start to enhance business value? Now, these metrics, they come from the State of DevOps report. This is actually a screenshot from the State of DevOps report 2019 from Google, where they looked at some of the top performers in the industry. Now, first question they asked, deployment frequency. How often are you actually releasing product to your customer and deploying code to production or release it to the end user? Elite performers, think Amazon, probably releasing tens of thousands of times per day, ideally on demand. Essentially, you're very quickly writing code, getting it out the door, and it's ready to go. That's your elite performers. High performers are going to be once a day to once a week. You'll then see the lower performers are basically once per month or once every 6 months. That's one of your core throughput measures that you're looking at. Same thing with lead time for changes. How long does it take for lead time for change? How long does it take for to go from code committed to code successfully running in production? It gives you a quick proxy on what your throughput is. How quickly can this team actually go from a request to a deployment? We can at least get a rough understanding of what that takes. Elite performers are going to be about once per day or a little less than once per day. Time to restore service. Things are going to go wrong. We're going to make mistakes. What happens when we make that mistake? How long does it take for us to restore service if something does go wrong? We want to make sure we have that high quality product and that high quality service for our teams. Again, our customers aren't going to use it if our platform's down. So let's make sure we get it back up and running quickly. The elite performers, generally going to be less than once per hour, or less than an hour, excuse me. Whereas a less performing team could be down for an entire week or a month. Change failure rates.
You're looking at this, team by team, like that's.
You're looking at this product by product or service by service.
Product team,
Yep.
okay.
Yes. So it depends on what your team is. So if you're dealing with a team of teams dealing with a very large app, you're going to have to consider this just across that particular application or product. Again, we're not thinking about it from the team's perspective here. We're thinking about it from the customer's experience perspective. So again, change failure rates. When we do a deployment, we want to make sure that we're thinking about what happens when things go wrong. Again, what's our change failure rates? Do we have methods to prevent change failures from happening? Again, do we require a hotfix, a rollback, stuff like that? We want to make sure we get an understanding of that. Again, the top performers are generally going to be between 0 and 15%, and our worst performers are going to be around 46 to 60%. Now, these are just 4 measures to help us start to articulate the technical performance of the services or products we are providing. We can then start to translate that into value. Now, what leaders must measure? For one, let's measure our throughput, and our flow. So those 2 key measures, deployment frequency and lead time, those help us understand throughput and flow. Change failure rate, that's our quality measure, and time to restore, that's our resilience. Our goal is to really start to bring these to the team and help them identify these metrics. By the way, if you're working on a team that's in a totally different field, maybe you're dealing with, maybe it's in an integrated software team, or maybe you're even dealing with some hardware, just identify these core metrics. The same concepts still apply: throughput, flow, quality, and resilience. Our goal is to try to bring these to the team's attention, help them interpret these metrics so that we can start to identify constraints that are leading to any major issue within these 4 areas. So for instance, slow lead time, maybe we find out that slow lead time is coming from maybe some of our quality practices. QA takes a little too long to do testing because it's manual. Well, what if we do some test automation, do some test first methodologies like test-driven development from extreme programming, so that our developers are writing those unit tests first, so we start to have a little bit more robustness to our test suites. Again, slows us down a little bit, but it might actually help remediate the constraint that QA is dealing with. Maybe we do some pipeline upgrades. That will speed up our lead time, which means we can deliver a little bit more quickly to the customer, get a little bit more of that value out the door more quickly. Some real examples of this, the Netflix Simian Army, they use this to simulate disasters at all of all types. So they literally will basically take down an entire data center. Why do they do that? Well, again, no one's going to be watching Netflix if it periodically goes down randomly. So how do we actually make a system that's very resilient that our customers can continuously use? We'll simulate disasters, see how the teams respond, make sure that they are capable of doing it. It's not just a simulation where someone's scheduling a call and going through a DR scenario type activity. It's literally, nope, data center's down right now. How's the team going to respond? You're ready to go. You're actually making sure that you have this sort of realistic activity to make sure you can see how people respond so that your resilience is high and your time to restore is low. Another example, Etsy makes releases and deployment so easy that they've had pets do it. They can make it a push of a button, make it so simple to actually release into production so that you don't need to get a bunch of teams together, so that you don't necessarily need to have a specific sign-off process. You want to make sure that you have that fast lead time so you get that continuous flow of value. So make the system so stupid that your pets can do it. Or so simple, excuse me, not stupid. And one thing I've actually done to apply this, and these foreign measures, it might be a little bit overwhelming for some folks, but they're actually pretty straightforward. And I'm going to show just quickly how we applied it at this particular team I was working with not that long ago. And this is a little bit of just a picture of what this product was like. Some of the reviews, it's quite literally was viewed as a crime against humanity, was what some people described it as. I kind of like this one on dealing with a rabid raccoon. But anyways, let's just put it this way. Chaotic platform, chaotic product, really struggled. And we had to do a major upgrade on it that made things even worse. It was basically built in the garage type product. Everyone was afraid to touch it with a 30-foot pole. It took a lot to get anything done. People were afraid to do any releases because, again, no one wanted to be blamed for anything that could go wrong. So they did a quarterly release cadence when they thought everything was buttoned up, and they still would have issues. Now, one of the main challenges for this particular group was they had 7 developers and 1 QA. And then we did this major upgrade, and there was post cutover chaos that took place. And there was a breaking point. Post migration, we went from something like maybe about 100 complaints a week or so to quite literally thousands. Pretty much every customer was complaining. And the VP actually infamously on an incident call chose to share this lovely GIF of a dumpster fire just going down a river because that really summed up the situation. So biggest challenge I had was I was the scrum master for this team at the time. And I'm sitting here dealing with this inundated call volume. I have a product owner who's freaking out. Dev team is working overtime to try to figure out what to do, but we're a little bit stuck because, again, no one wants to change our release practices. We're basically dealing with things ad hoc. So how do we actually bring some sanity to this chaos? Well, I borrowed from both those door metrics and that theory constraint stuff I mentioned previously. I asked the team just a simple question. Where's their core bottleneck? Pretty obvious answer there. When you have 7 devs and 1 QA, testing was the bottleneck. Testing created a bit of a traffic jam, and this led to part of that slow release issue. And the bigger problem there was we would have defects pile up behind them. So you take the quick systems thinking approach. Let's get away from the people, think about the system. How might we fix the workflow? What might we change here to help make QA's life easier? How might we take ownership of the entire system so we're not thinking about just dev and QA? Again, think about your entire team here, think about the entire organization. And what can we do as a team to just be proud of what we're building and ask what it'll take? And what are the things we can change? Fairly straightforward. Well, first thing that came up, we have to fix this issue with testing. How do we actually implement better testing practices that mean that our QA person is not getting overwhelmed? Now let's do test-driven development. Again, have the developers now start practicing writing unit tests in advance so that at least we can reduce some of the burden. And it's not going to reduce all of it. And again, our QA is still going to be overwhelmed. Okay, but we can reduce it a little bit. Okay, what do we do with the rest of these folks? Well, let's have them pair up a little bit, do some pair programming, and get some knowledge sharing going. reduce those silos a little bit. So again, if you have a guy who can work only one area of the system, let's at least cross-train a little bit and get them familiar with it so that, again, if there is that inevitable incident call that's going to come up with this platform on fire, we won't just have to rely on that one lead developer. We actually have a few folks we can pull from to make it much easier. So let's take advantage of that fact that we can't get everything done because our QA is a bottleneck. Have a few folks, start to reduce that burden by using test-driven development, and then have some pairing going on to reduce some of these silos that we had that had built up in the team. Didn't even solve for everything. We had a couple of developers who are still sitting there idle. What else can we do? Well, let's see what we can automate a little bit. Maybe there's some manual processes we can do, such as our deployment scripts and test suites. Let's have the devs just move over there and do a little bit of automation and focus on that for a time. This helps us then start to think about how do we actually get smaller, more frequent changes out the door for these big bang fixes, instead of just doing a once a week type fix, which is what they're doing under their incident time. How do we actually move this to a once a day type thing? How do we actually release once a day to try to fix the system? And let's track this by measuring our lead time. So again, this wasn't just lead time within the incident period, but overall for the entire product, we shifted to this daily release practice. And let's think about our change failure rates. So again, this team was previously releasing quarterly. They would still have, I think, 25% or so of the time they would fail. Let's get that down to 0. Let's release every day and try to get that down to 0. We'll still fail occasionally, but let's make it a small failure so it's easy to bounce back. Those questions helped us move things along. So the outcomes within 2 weeks, we got away from the immediate dumpster fire. Platform was stabilized. Again, instead of just trying to hope that we could solve all these issues at once and do a big bang fix, we just did incremental fixes. Every single day, like clockwork, we were releasing stuff that would slowly and gradually stabilize the platform. Within 3 months of this practice, we went well beyond just incident calls that were coming in. We actually reduced our complaints to 0. And that was because, again, the team started thinking about how do we build in quality? How do we actually do this deployment frequency and get things done more quickly, but at the same time doing it with quality? These things are inherently tied to each other, which is what the State of DevOps report found. So the more quickly we're building and the more we're thinking about quality in terms of getting stuff to completion, we ended up actually eliminating a lot of these customer complaints. Senior leaders actually were willing then to start removing our legacy policies, so things like our change advisory boards, as well as a few sign-offs, to actually enable the team to do this and operate more effectively. So they got this long-term benefit of being able to keep doing this practice without the same bureaucratic overhead of other teams, even though the platform was still a little bit wonky. Now, that just comes from asking the right question. At the time, as a Scrum Master, I wasn't the most technical. I'm not going to sit here and say I'm the most technical still, but biggest thing is do you have an understanding of what's possible? Can we ask the team what we can do differently? Can we even poke them a little bit on what's possible out there? Hey, I see Amazon does this, right? Hey, I see Netflix does this. What's the difference here? How can we start to bring some of these practices into our own ways of working? What might that do for us? If we can ask the team what we can change in our development practices, such as adding test-first methodologies, then what might that do for us? Well, it might reduce the impact on QA, make things a little bit easier. So leadership action. So again, main thing that we had here, since we were able to sort of bridge these two concepts, again, if we can build in quality, even though we have developers maybe pairing with each other and doing this test-first methodology and they're doing automation, well, that sounds a little bit weird at first. Your product folks might be a little bit nervous. Well, if we start to help them understand what business value this attains, well, we can still start seeing that gets value. So what happens if we start removing things like manual sign-off processes, such as that change advisory board I mentioned previously, and replace that with an automated one? We have an automated check instead. Well, maybe we'll find that we'll actually end up having improved quality because we're actually going to be able to automate that system, and we'll have an automated generated report rather than having to worry about whether or not someone understands exactly what the team's working on and can look at and understand exactly what the team's doing. But removing the person from it, we're creating a system that's easier to manage, so we can actually help engage better action. Now, the coach's role in this, again, our big thing is identify those bottlenecks. Be able to see them and spot them. Get familiar with the team. Step back and listen to what they're seeing and saying. Once we start to identify those bottlenecks, how can we advocate for the best practices? And if we need, go to leadership and help them change the organization. Our goal should be able to translate these metrics into actual business results. So again, if I can reduce that lead time, what's that mean? Well, maybe it means that if I can get a feature done in a month, if we can reduce that by maybe eliminating some handoffs or decisions within our system, or improve our technical practices so the team can develop more quickly, maybe it means within a month I can actually get 2 features done. I can do more with less. Our goal is to be able to translate these technical skills into the value delivery. Now with that, quick question for the audience. What is the most significant bottleneck your team or organization faces right now? And how does that constraint impact the organization? Just a couple words from folks in the audience. These bottlenecks can exist anywhere. Seeing someone in the chat saying dependencies from other teams. Dependencies aren't necessarily a bottleneck in themselves, I might add. Might be the handoff that's the bottleneck. Where in the process might that be? What are some of the constraints? Systems testing, there you go. So systems testing might be a constraint. What's that impact have to the organization?
Um, this actually brings in collaboration. You really have to stay on top of this, otherwise that becomes a bottleneck to the release of the product.
Yep. And one of the most important things here is you're trying to create a system in essence, and the system does have to be managed. We have to make sure we are staying on top of it, ideally with some sort of telemetry. And I'm seeing a lot of this come in with folks right now. So things like, again, stage gates, tech debt, UAT. This is all stuff that needs to be managed. At the end of the day, what's the biggest value for an agile coach or scrum master? Well, it's not just moving Jira tickets around. It is really looking at the system and understanding, hey, these things exist. Tech debt's a problem with our team. Okay, I'm a product owner. I have no idea what that means. What are you talking about? Well, what's the result of that? Now, if you just say we're going slower, product owner may not care, product manager may not care. Start to then quantify. Well, our deployments right now take a week longer, not our deployments. Maybe it takes a week longer to actually do, to get this feature built because of the tech debt within our system. And our team's average cost is $50,000 a week. Well, if we don't address this, it's $50,000 a week every single week. Every time we want to do a feature, let's start to articulate that value. What's that cost? What's that delay going to cost us? That's what we're trying to look for here. So yeah, things like change management timeframes. I like the fact that this has come up. The State of DevOps report has found that organizations that use change advisory boards and that sort of manual stage gate type approach is generally actually going to be less effective because one, automated processes are going to be a little bit more robust. Again, you can have that automated test suite that proves out what you can deliver. It's going to be quicker. You don't have to sit around and wait for a meeting. So you get more deployed with higher quality more quickly. And again, probably don't necessarily need people sitting in those seats. So you're actually doing it more effectively, more efficiently, at better cost. That means you're getting more value delivered out the door on a daily basis. So how do we actually start honing this? Well, the first thing is technical skills aren't optional for agile leaders. Teams obviously respect people who speak their language, and we have to learn to speak their language. So if you're coming on a team, sit down, join them for whatever development meetings they're having or technical reviews. And try to understand their what they're doing and understand their language. Start to hear them out and hear where their problems are. So you can start to think about where these bottlenecks might exist, and you can ask questions around that. Once you get an ability to speak your language, you built up that credibility, start to think about where these constraints are. How might we fix some of the bottlenecks in the system? Where are the biggest bottlenecks? And what may it take to do it? Again, we have to understand our team's way of working to do that and ask these questions to find areas to improve. Coach beyond the ceremonies. We have to guide teams on these technical practices, things like trunk-based development or continuous feedback. If we want to help our teams improve, we have to understand what's possible out there, what exists in the market, what are other groups doing, what are other technical practices that exist that may exist, because again, your team may not have that knowledge. So if you identify a bottleneck, go out there and see how other groups have tackled it, bring it back to the team and get their input and see what they might think. And if your team's excited about it, well, then connect those technical practices to business value so you can help prioritize those improvements. And product owner may not understand why you might need to, bring in something like trunk-based development to the team. Help them understand what that might mean. What does that mean for lead time? How many more stories do they get as a result, or how many more features do they get delivered? And maybe the product owner doesn't have the authority to shift the system. Where do you have to go to do it? One of the ways we actually got rid of that change advisory board for that product that was on fire I mentioned previously was by going to a VP and showing them what the results were when we started to enhance our practices in our system and what it would mean to actually be able to deploy without that waiting period that came as a result of that bureaucracy. And they saw, oh, well, this means it'll drive down our customer complaints and keep driving it down because we'll be able to release more often. Yeah, I'm on board for that. You have to be able to articulate that. Now, I'm picking a little bit on the frameworks out there, so I'm going to throw a framework out myself. Notice that Scrum, XP, Scaled Agile, those methods aren't really on here. This is the Agile Coaching Competency Framework from Lisa Adkins, probably one of the most popular on the market. It's the X-Wing framework. Notice there are 3 areas of mastery we want to consider. Technical mastery, business mastery, and transformation mastery. Technical, again, that's kind of where I've been focused on for most of this conversation. But then there's this other element here, which is business value. How do we actually drive business value, and how do we actually think about that? And finally, transformation mastery. It's good that you know both, but you still have to evolve your system. And all 3 are the most core elements of what it means to be an agile coach. It's thinking about how do you actually marry these concepts and act as a bit of a bridge to enhance your teams, enhance your organizations, understand what it takes, what is it we're building, what's it delivering for our customer, what the value is, and how do we actually take it from its current state to something more effective and more efficient. Now I'm curious, because we're going to talk about developing this mastery. What is your level of mastery on a scale of 1 to 10 within each of these domains? Still seeing 16 people here, hoping I can get a few folks. Just think about, are you a master on these or maybe a new learner? It's okay. We're all on this road together. Some of us might be a master in all 3. If you are, please hit me up after. I could use a coach. If you are new, feel free to reach out in the chat if you do need a coach. Seeing a few different folks. It's all right. So some folks with some technical skills, some with business, some with transformation. Seven, 8. All right. So a little bit of a varied audience. I didn't focus enough on transformation in this chat, but in this lecture for today, maybe that's a future activity.
How are people entering the data?
Menti.com. So.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Yep. Yeah. So again, for folks who might have missed it, we're close to the tail end of this. You can join at menti.com and using the code. Should be at the top of the screen. So again,
I re-added it.
Yep. Thank you. I saw you've been posting it. Thank you, Maggie. All right. So again, people have some different knowledges, and that's okay. Everyone has different strengths. I actually didn't realize. Looks like a little bit of a different distribution around here. So main idea here is just to start to self-gauging yourselves. Where do you sit in your technical mastery, or business mastery, transformation mastery? How do you yourself, where's your level of skill? Let's just take stock of that and think about it, because once we start doing that, we can start to ask the questions. To the folks who answered, I think I saw about 10 in there. You rank yourself. Great. What area do you see yourself as needing to develop more? These are just questions for yourself to think about. So what was your weakest area? What might it take to actually create mastery in that area? And how might you use your other skills and leverage those skills from whatever your strongest area was to actually help connect the dots? And what might it take? Start just asking those questions to yourselves. But I'm just going to go through a little bit about what we can do. So first things first, think throughput. Now, when I say throughput, again, it's not just how many features we're delivering, but how much value we're delivering. How are we making money more effectively for our organization? So first step, shift from iteration efficiency to flow. If you're working within a Scrum context, or maybe you're working in a safe environment, whatever it may be, don't just think about iteration boundaries or stuff like that. Think about every single day. What's it take to be more effective and more efficient? How do we reduce our operating expense, or how do we actually deliver more value that might generate more revenue for our organization? What are these things that we can do on an ongoing basis that can maximize how quickly value moves from idea to the customer? Second, speed of learning and risk reduction. So let's make sure that we are thinking about quality checks throughout our system. What's it actually take to validate that we're doing the right things at every single step that takes to deliver value? How do we experiment quickly? How do we make sure we're building things that our customers care about? And how are we testing to make sure that these experiments are doing what we expect them to do? And how do we quickly pivot to address issues and seize on opportunities? Focus on delivering the right thing. Again, shorter cycles means that we can confirm that we're solving real customer problems. Again, it's one thing to do a proof of concept. It's another thing to release something to our customer. How do we actually get something small at the door before big investments? We didn't talk about it too much today, but things like blue-green deployments, for instance, you might have production environments for your products where maybe only a small fraction of them are going to your newest release. So you can actually validate, hey, is this making the customer more excited? Is this doing what we think it's going to do for them? If we can confirm we're delivering the right thing, it means we're probably increasing that revenue lever a little bit more, which means we're probably on the right track. And then making sure we're thinking about these feedback loops. Probably the most important thing within Agile itself is this idea of empiricism, and that's all based on feedback loops. Throughput isn't just about building more stuff. It's about making sure we're continuously validating our systems. Are we building high quality things quickly? Are we building them with feedback from our customers to know that they're happy and that they're excited to buy our products? It's a question we want to ask, and we want to make sure we're continuously asking that and having our loops built in. So quick quote here from myself. So increasing throughput not only means faster delivery. Again, it's not just about building more features. If our customers aren't using those features, who cares? It also requires frequent, high-quality feedback loops to ensure we're delivering the right outcomes. What is it we're doing for our organization? What's the value of our product? Is it being built with quality? At speed? Are we quickly identifying defects and problems within our product? Are we testing to make sure that, hey, is this going to do what we think it does for our customer? Are we validating the assumptions that we made when we started thinking about what we had to build and making sure that it is satisfying that need? And creating it as a virtuous cycle. So again, these feedback loops become more frequent. Let's make sure that we are getting as frequently as we can and make sure we're building that quality so that overall throughput increases even further. Just a quick example here. So just understand the value of feedback loops. This is the extreme programming feedback loops that exist. This is just to start thinking about some feedback loops that might exist within your own system. But extreme programming, I really like their way of describing it because they go down not just like to your daily scrum or your daily stand-up or whatever your meeting is. They're thinking about it on the minute by minute level. If we do test-driven development, we're going to have feedback within minutes if the code's doing the right thing. If we're doing pair programming and we have two people sitting on a call working on the same thing, we're going to have that immediate feedback where people are going to have conversations on, hey, is this the best way to do this? Or are we solving the right problem? Or is there another way to go about this? Or maybe we can do this in a way that is more effective or more efficient. So we can really tighten that feedback loop down to the second by second level. Then we do have our things like our daily events, our stand-ups and those sorts of things. We have that daily loop to check in with each other. And then we also have things like our reviews and our demos and our retrospectives, taking a look at our system and the product we're building, sitting down with the customer, getting in their mindset and seeing, is this product that we built in the last iteration the right thing? We want to think about the feedback loops within our system and what that looks like. And it's good to sit down with your teams to understand what that may be and try to figure out what type of feedback are we getting. Are we getting technical feedback? Are we catching our defects early and often? Are we getting customer feedback to make sure that we're meeting our user needs? Then finally, process feedback. Do we understand our processes and our system so we can help drive our team performance? So coming back to Mentimeter, quick question for the audience. Which aspect of our feedback loops might need the most improvement within your teams? What are some of the feedback loops that might need the most improvement on your teams? Feel free to write them in the chat if you see something different than one of these three. Missing feedback sources already. What else? Missing feedback sources. It's going to be a big one. I've actually had a few conversations today about missing data to actually measure if we're improving our system at all. 3, 4, frequency of feedback. Yep, that can be a common one. Speed of incorporating feedback. Got 6 responses. Let's see if we can get a few more. I think I got 10 previously. Lack of measurement and feedback. That's a good one too. Is the feedback actually something we can act on and make decisions around? It's a good call out there, Peter. Psychological safety. People maybe not feeling able to speak up, or maybe changing data or manipulating data, whatever it may be, because they're worried that leadership might slap them if they present the actual real information. All right, some good responses there. So again, main thing is think about the feedback loops within your team. What's that look like? What may it be? And how might we start to think about it? Again, if you're missing feedback sources, how do we incorporate that data? How do we actually get that feedback? Or sort of building off of Peter's comment there, how do we measure it in a way? And how do we actually have a conversation with our team to know that we're measuring the right thing? If it's speed of incorporating that feedback, how do we actually change our processes to enable us to actually act on that feedback? Do we have to have a conversation on, hey, we have this information. If we don't act on it, what's it going to cost if we don't act on it? Maybe we have to help our product owners, product managers in the business be able to actually prioritize some of these changes. And if it's frequency of feedback, how do we actually incorporate quicker feedback? What are the practices we might do? Could we do pair programming to get that sort of second by second, play by play? These are some of the questions to start asking your teams. Now, sort of going on. So focusing on domain, the business and technical. Again, our goal is we have to understand both the business, what's the return on investment, what's our market strategy, and the technical. What's DevOps pipeline, what's TDD. We need acumen in both domains. Doesn't mean we have to be perfect in both. Doesn't mean we have to be the top in our field and all these things. But we do have to have at least an understanding. One, for the technical, how do we actually quickly identify these bottlenecks and make informed decisions on tooling and architecture so we can have these conversations with our team. And then 2, the business side. Let's make sure we're asking the right why behind our product direction and ensure we're aligned on the return on investment, our customer value. What's this actually mean for our product and the systems we're building? Just a quick example here. So Teams that can merge business insights with technical execution, generally, again, if a team's delivering faster, better time to market and better user-focused outcomes, these teams generally are going to have tight feedback loops. So again, I mentioned Netflix before with disaster recovery. They're really well known for their DevOps type practices. Well, you can actually see this reflect within their cash flow statements. So usually you're going to see this impacted within net profit, return on investment, or cash flow. Again, Netflix, they had this, they spiked their free cash flow year over year just because they knew exactly how customers were using their services. So I believe 2019, this was when they chose to disable the family sharing, where people were letting friends and others use their accounts. Well, they found a way that, what if we actually disable that? What might that actually do for our business? What will the impact be? Well, turns out it ended up actually spiking their free cash flow. So they ended up Maggie grumble. It's good for the overall ability for the organization to deliver value, is the most important takeaway there. But they actually really did spike their cash flow because they knew exactly how people are going to respond. They're still going to use Netflix, but it will mean that we're going to get higher cash flow as a result, which is good for the longevity of the organization. Again, you don't see any major change on their CapEx, but their operating cash flow and free cash flow and their returns do go up as a result. Now, what we should do for ourselves, the first is let's make sure that we start speaking a common language. First thing, DORA, use the DORA type metrics. So what's your deployment frequency? What's your lead time? What's your change failure rate, time to restore, et cetera. And then understand your business's KPIs. So what's our revenue? What's our customer satisfaction? Try to unite the teams around both of these. How do we align these concepts? What's it actually mean to be a successful team? And how do we actually influence the ability for our product and service to be successful? Collaborative road mapping. It's not enough to just have technical and architecture folks sitting on a call and talking about what we might do to solve whatever business problem was tossed over the wall. Let's incorporate some sales folks and support folks. Get people thinking about what it actually means to have a technically feasible solution that meets a market need. Systems thinking. We want to understand the system as a whole within our organizations and how to improve it. How do we actually look at the system as a whole, end to end, not just engineering tasks, not just QA tasks? It can exist anywhere in our system. It may exist upstream, maybe where we're getting our needs from our customers. Bottlenecks can appear pretty much anywhere, so we have to be able to understand where these are occurring. And finally, start taking an outcome-driven approach. Focus on connecting both these technical outputs to the business outcomes. So each technical improvement should be connected to a business value. So again, if we're automating X hours, we automated whatever activity the team's dealing with, well, it's going to free up this amount of time for the team. What's this mean? What's this mean that we're going to deliver more quickly? How much value does that mean? How much cost savings does that mean? We have to coach our teams to be able to consider these practices. We can communicate this out to the wider organization. All right, so starting small. Again, depending on where you were sitting, pick one area. And by the way, I'm just going to throw in here because it's not on here. Even if it's like transformation, you can include that as well. What does it take to actually transform an organization? But start with the area that you're weakest. Maybe it was a technical area or a business area. Start familiarizing yourselves with it. Maybe shadow a developer for an hour a week or something if you're weak on technical, or if you're weak on business, familiarize yourself with the company's revenue model. Get familiar with it. Attend some, maybe meeting with sales even, or product managers. Once you start to understand these domains a little better within your teams, think about what short manageable experiments you might be able to do to help enhance your team's ability to deliver. Maybe that's going to be higher value for the customer, or maybe different technical approaches. Start to try to practice this with the team. Ask them the question, what can we do different? And let's try it, let's measure it and see what happens. Use that regular reflection and feedback loops. So use retrospectives to gauge progress. Again, capture some of that feedback. Use those feedback loops and see, are we moving in the right direction? Ask for feedback from both people on your team, technical, non-technical, even maybe off the team. Try to get an understanding of how you were successful or not successful. and then share and document what you learned. So again, what is it you did to enhance your system? What is it you did differently? Start sharing that out to others. Again, if you did test-driven development, did that remediate a QA bottleneck? What does that mean for your ability to deliver? How much value are you getting out the door to the customer? How much cost savings does that mean if you're delivering maybe twice as many features? Let's try to share these wins out so other teams can start to scale that success. All right, so I'm just about at time. So some resources for folks to be successful. I do recommend taking a look at things like Extreme Programming by Kent Beck, Phoenix Project and DevOps Handbook by Gene Kim, Des Humble, Kevin Bear. Again, great books on DevOps. Finally, Theory of Constraints from Eli Goldratt, The Goal. Again, go out there, start talking with folks. If you're not so comfortable within the technical domain, I do recommend taking a look at some of these areas. DevOps Institute's got some great things and meetups. I think even in the Boston area, there are hackathons. There's a Modern Software Engineering channel to get familiar with these concepts. Again, try to focus on what may have been a struggle for you. Now, before we close for the day, I have one last activity. What steps might you take to help boost your team, your ability to coach your team's success? What was an area you may have struggled in, and what might you do to address that gap? Maybe a tough question for some folks. Think about what may have been your weakest area and how you might improve. Make sure they understand we're a team. Yep. Understand more. Increase technical knowledge. Yep. Yeah. One thing to do there, sometimes it's just good to, again, shadow a developer if they're willing to, coach you a little bit on your own team. From communicating with people who prefer to work alone. Yep. Yeah, big one it can be that handoff practice. So, that can be a delay in the system where you're handing work from one person to another. So being able to understand what that might mean, if it costs time, you can articulate that as a potential constraint. Scheduling with reduced planned work. Discuss at retrospectives, areas of weakness in the team, maybe CI/CD pipeline, pair with a team member and work with DevOps. I like that one. That's nice and robust. All right. I think I can end it here. Engage in DevOps to deliver value metrics tied to improvement. Nice. I like that one. So Maggie, I'll turn it over, but I do have a Q&A if folks want to join. But I think we can just leave it here if you like, and I'll just wait for hands to come up.
Questions from the yeah. All right, great, Alex. This was great. Yeah. So, folks, we're still recording. Just as a reminder, I'll turn off the recording a little bit later for those of you who don't want to be in the recording. But feel free to come off, ask questions, add on. I was capturing some of the ideas and some of the books that Alex mentioned. So feel free to add that into the text if you like, or come off mute, turn on your camera and ask a question while we have Alex.
Oh, Alex, can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, okay, good. Fantastic presentation. I wish you could absorb everything you said like a sponge, but I could not. But here is my question, if you will. What do you
Sure.
do when you're working on these types of events and the span of control is outside of the organization? That is, there are external contributors, other companies that are also responsible for the bottlenecks, pipelines, breakdowns, and the break fix solutioning. And you don't have control over those organizations because it's an external entity. So what do we do with that, or what have you done in those situations?
So that gets a little bit complicated at this enterprise level. The first is kind of going all the way back to one of those comments I made where the bottleneck can't exist outside of your system. Again, that Toyota example on the gearbox. You might sell a gearbox to Toyota, but Toyota sells to the end customer. Sort of same concept applies here. So how do you actually fix that constraint when it's going back into the system? Well, one, we have to start articulating to that organization that's the need. We have to deliver this to our customer, and you're currently not helping us deliver, and this is what the impact is for us. First, that's the first thing. Just like, let's understand that that's the reality. Internally, we want to make sure that that's very clear. What's this costing us? Then the question becomes, how do we work with that vendor on how to change it? That might mean changing our contracts. Maybe it means changing the relationship. Maybe it means finding a new partner. But the main thing is let's articulate the system all the way back as far as we can. Get that internal buy-in. Maybe they're the only person on the market who can supply it, and we're just stuck, and that's kind of what it is. But maybe there's a way we can modify it or augment it. Maybe it's like we change our SLA or change our relationship there a little bit. Let's have that conversation though. Not sure that helps. Yep.
Thank you. It did help. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Anybody else have questions or comments, or do you have an example that you'd like to share with the group of some success or failure that lesson learned that you've had in these areas of trying to remediate bottlenecks in your group? Or any of the other points?
Hi. Hi, Alex. Thank you for the great.
Hello.
Hi. So I have a question. We are in a big enterprise environment, and our teams are dealing with complicated systems. And we do have system architects or solution architects. And it seems to be based on a couple of incidents that the architects are not strong enough to identify the dependencies and understand the entire system well enough to find out the problems. So is there a way, this is probably different from what a role that no matter how technical coach can be, we're not going to be able to replace that and find that problem. Is there a suggestion from you that you can help?
So again, going back to theory of constraints, which is kind of the main thing here. If you have a consistent set of incidents, try to figure out if there's a pattern among them. That's the first thing. Can you see if there's maybe a core area, core type of problem, core categorization, whatever it may be, even if it's say 50% or 60% of the incidents, start with those and see which architect might be responsible for that system, and then start working with them and whomever else is supporting that particular area, and focus on that small area first. That's kind of the idea with all these practices, is like, just start with that small thing. Like if you can identify a consistent issue or reoccurring issue, start with that small one, work with that particular person and see what's going on with them. Maybe it is a knowledge gap, or maybe it's he doesn't understand something else in the system. Maybe he actually understands the system perfectly, and maybe it's just something a little bit funky. I don't know.
Yeah.
But focus on that first area first and just pick one. What do we do different? How do we change it? What's the small thing we can do that might enhance this and eliminate this? And once it's gone, what do we do right that might have contributed? And then go to the next one, But yeah. Don't boil the entire ocean within the group, especially when you're talking about knowledge gaps within a large community.
Yeah. There's always politics in there, so teams try to point fingers. So
But
that's a good suggestion. I was thinking of having a one-on-one with that architect, just to from the perspective that I want to understand a little bit, because I'm not technical enough, and then maybe you can explain a little more to me. So we'll see how that goes. Yeah,
that builds your own technical knowledge, and that's one thing you want to do for yourself. One thing I'm also going to say is see what the business impact of these things are as well. What's the impact of these incidents that keep coming up? It's costing someone somewhere.
Yeah.
But if we're just saying it's just a systems issue, well, what's that actually mean? Like, how much is this costing us? What's this doing to our organization? It makes it a little easier to have these conversations.
Yeah, agree. Thank you, Alex.
Of course.
For sure, right? That's the thing. Everyone knows. Sometimes everyone knows this, the elephant in the room. Oh, everyone knows we have a problem with system X, but no one wants to go near it. Like no one wants to be held responsible for it, or like,
And,
and every, you know, yeah.
and one thing I will always say there is to coach the system, not the people, you know, or manage the system, not the people. You can say it in any number of ways. What's our system meant to do? What's it meant to achieve? Let's just be real and transparent about it, and no blame towards people at the end of the day as best we can. Certainly there are personnel problems that exist in the world, but as best we can, let's manage the system and create a system that we can actually solve for. You know, again, identify those constraints, identify what success looks like, where are the bottlenecks, and then, you know, manage it from there.